Welcome everyone on Facebook and YouTube and all of our people joining here live on Zoom. Just letting some people in the room.
Okay. Let's admit a few more people in the Zoom room. Welcome to everyone on the live stream. I don't know if there's anybody there yet. Let's
Spotlight.
Lots of button clicking. All right, do you want to start recording?
Yeah, let's start recording. Let's get started. All right, welcome everyone to Monday Musings. I am Dr. Syra, and I don't even know how to introduce myself today. I will say I'm a lifelong learner. I'm in the middle of another course that I'm taking, so I'm feeling like a learner right now. Also a teacher. For those who might not know, I teach at a university in a clinical counseling program, and I'm also a therapist and a clinical supervisor and a mom and Faizan's wife, and this is Faizan. That's a long introduction today. I'm feeling like a lot of things on this last 4-day long weekend.
My name's Faizan. I am here. That's my introduction.
You'll have a short one and I'll have a long one. So spontaneously on Friday, my daughter and I decided to go to the movies. And so the movie that we wanted to watch wasn't playing at a good time in our local area. So we live in the Shuswap, which is like the Okanagan in BC. About 6-hour drive from Calgary, 6-hour drive from Vancouver, right in the middle. And so we decided that since our movie wasn't playing anywhere local, that we would just go to Vancouver. So we drove to Vancouver to watch a movie, and one of my aunts set us up so that we had a place to stay there, and we just had a lovely, lovely time. And then our whole goal, the whole plan, was to go to Costco on the way back. So we were going to come back, either stop in Vancouver, like in Richmond there's a Costco, and then in Kamloops there's a Costco. What we didn't remember was that Costco closes early on Saturdays. I had no idea because I was going in the morning. And so we missed Costco. So we drove all the way to Vancouver and back. Didn't even do our errand. That was our spontaneous. So that's why I'm feeling like a lot of things. That was Friday and Saturday for me. And I'm hoping that others on our call had a good family day, long weekend, that you're able to do some things that maybe you don't usually do, or take a little bit of a longer break or a sleep in. Or I feel like sometimes, I know for myself and maybe people on our call or people who are watching this after, for me, I know I can kind of get into that routine, right? And the rhythms and routines are good, but for me, sometimes it starts to get boring and I need a bit of a change. So after the long drive to Vancouver and back on Friday night and Saturday morning, yesterday I spent the day rearranging my kitchen and dining area.
Mm-hmm.
So lots of just got that like kind of energetic, want to get stuff done. It's kind of like an early spring cleaning since it's really warm here in the Okanagan.
Yeah.
So yeah, maybe for those who are with us live in Zoom in the chat, feel free to write, did you do anything interesting or different or special over the last few days, just as we're settling in, and then we're going to go into our topic.
Yeah, I just stayed out of the way of your changes that you were making.
Had a lot of energy.
I did something different, right? Like I read a book.
In one day.
Beginning to end. It was about 350 pages or something like that.
A novel, not even a learning book.
No, a novel, which I haven't done since, I think, our honeymoon. That was the first time, I think, since then.
That you sat down and read.
Sat down and just read a book and
that was yesterday, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in between, I watched a new show, right? Like, so all of it, which was
relaxed,
great.
Right?
Yeah. It was great. So I think it was interesting. It was different. And now I've got the itch of like, there's so much to do.
So people are sharing. Somebody was decluttering.
Yeah.
Someone else said it was my daughter's birthday on Saturday, so we spent the weekend celebrating. So today, let's get into our topic for today. Oh, but before that, I have a couple of announcements.
Of course you do.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Here are the announcements. Two announcements. One, I totally forgot.
The courses.
Oh yeah,
courses.
Right. Okay. Okay. So
how did I know that was what your announcements was about?
The courses, yeah.
One of them, or two of them, maybe.
So there's two different courses that I want to tell you about that you're invited to join in on if you're interested. So one is a free little kind of mini course. It's called Counseling South Asian Clients. And it's only 40 minutes long. Like, it's me sharing a specific tool that I use with my South Asian clients. And it helps people to understand like family structures in not just South Asian households, but also all households that have a lot of like multi-generational, family-oriented, kind of collectivistic cultural background. So that could be West African, East African, Asian, South America, like lots of different communities where family is really, really central, and large extended families are really common. So if you want a tool that will help you kind of make sense of that, either for yourself or if you have loved ones that live in that kind of complex family where everybody's involved in everybody's stuff, it might be helpful. So that's free, and Faizan just put a note in the chat on that. And then I think for the people watching on YouTube, we'll like put a link or something. I don't know, something will happen. You can find us on dragonflyacademy.ca, and it's called Counseling South Asian Clients. It's a mini course. It's free. So that's one. And that's just like there. You could get it any time. The other one is actually a live course that I wanted to share with you, which is happening on March 16th at 2 to 4 p.m. Pacific time. So it's just 2 hours. And it's myself and our business partner, Texas Pack. And we're kind of co-teaching this. It's kind of it's called Back to Basics, the 6 building blocks for personal growth and spiritual alignment. So we're taking kind of 6 particular principles that we think that we've kind of, I mean, not just we think, like in the research, but also in our clinical experience, are kind of the foundational tools when people are going through this kind of personal transformation and growth work. And some of them we've talked about here. Like one of them is spiritual bypass, for example. That's something that one of the 6 that we'll be talking about. So we'll kind of go into a deep well, it's kind of an intro, but then we'll have like a longer workshop at some point. But this is kind of like a 101 back to basics. So that's $40. It's on March 16th. We do have limited room in the Zoom room. So that happened at when I ran the South Asian Counseling South Asian Clients workshop. We ended up having more people register that could fit in the Zoom room. So it's just going to be the first 100 people that register, that's who's going to get in the room. Otherwise, you'll have to just watch the recording after. But if you want to be there live, that's the thing. So $40. You can. How do people register for that?
I think it's just in our Jane app. So we'll figure out. Yeah.
More details to come on that. It'll be in one of our letters. But if you're interested, mark it in your calendar. March 16th, 2 to 4 p.m. Pacific. 2 hours with Texas and I, and it's going to be a really, really good snapshot of these different principles that you'll use all the time, that you're already probably using, but just giving some language around that. So I wanted to tell you about that. Okay, right. Now the fun stuff. So today's video, we forgot to send a newsletter on Friday because I was driving to Vancouver. But today's video was about estrogen and testosterone and how they impact communication. So I want to start, just like I did in the video, and say up front that I know this might be a controversial subject for some people, because there isn't enough research in non-binary gender. So there's, traditionally up until now, people up until, I don't know, sometime in the last 20 years, people have thought of genders as 2 things, like there's a male and there's a female, and we now know that their gender is much more fluid and complex than that. It's not just 2 things. But we do know from a brain perspective that there's estrogen in some brains and there's testosterone in some brains, whether it's that you were born with that or you get that, you introduce that at some point later in your life. The fact is there's going to be estrogen in some brains and testosterone in other brains. And so this is not to say that if you have estrogen in your brain, everything that we talk about is going to be true for you. And if you have testosterone in your brain, everything's going to be true for you. These are generalizations, and they're based on like large groups of people, large studies, and those studies always kind of generalize, right? So there may be things we talk about today that you're like, that's not me at all. So just ignore it then, just throw it away. But it might apply to somebody in your world who has estrogen or testosterone in their brain. And again, this is not to say that there simply isn't enough research yet on trans brains, so we don't know what happens in brains that have kind of a combination or different combinations of those hormones. But what we can talk about is what we know so far. So if this is gonna like get under your skin because it's just too delicate of a subject for you, I would suggest maybe skip this Monday Musings and maybe watch another one. But if you're interested in this particular research, we would encourage you to continue. Here's a great question. Does communication style change with age, given that hormone levels change as we get older for both male and female? Yes, it does. It does. And I'll talk a little bit about that as we go. Okay, shall we start?
Yeah.
Okay, so what we're going to be talking about today is based in these two books, The Male Brain and The Female Brain. The author is Luann Brizendine. And I really like these books because they're easy to read. They're funny. But they're also like point to certain research studies and things. So it's I think a nice combination of the science, but also like applying it in real life, not just like a lot of big words that nobody understands. It's like actually understandable. So so the way that we're just going to talk about it, just for ease of our conversation, is male brain and female brain, even though we know that gender is socially constructed and that's not necessarily going to capture everybody. But male brain meaning the brain with testosterone in it, female brain meaning the brain with estrogen in it, understanding there's limitations to that language. So, disclaimer over. Now we're just going to go into it.
5-minute disclaimer then.
But it has to be, right? Because I also understand that it's more complicated than just two things, and I do want to acknowledge that there's a whole chunk of people that aren't covered in this particular conversation.
And again, we do talk on these live streams.
Yeah.
Very, like, we generalize things. We have to, right? Like, because they're even in my brain and my brother's brains, there's going to be two different, right?
Of course.
How we communicate is going to be two different things. So I think that part's okay. But we, just like with anything, we do generalize, and this is extreme generalization, it seems like. So yeah. Part of the communication challenge, obviously, is there are certain expectations, right? And I think we had this. We were talking about this last week, I believe, where there are certain expectations of how the other person is going to respond and how the other person will communicate, and there's an assumption that they communicate just like I do.
Right.
They would respond just the way I do. They would start a conversation just the way I do. They would be maybe prone to being scared of, let's say, confrontation, just like I do, right? All of those things are kind of assumptions that we make within our communications. I know we had spoken about this. So how do hormones play into all of that?
So before we're even born, if you watch the video, you'll know that before we're even born, hormones are impacting the way that our brain develops. So when all fetuses start out kind of the same, and then there's a particular, there's an XY chromosome, there's an XX chromosome, but they basically look the same until about 6 weeks of gestation, and then there's a flood of testosterone for baby male fetuses. That testosterone impacts different areas of the brain. The baby girl doesn't have that, and so her brain just stays the way, just as it is, but the male brain does change when that flood happens. So here's some of the things that happen when that flood of testosterone surge through the baby fetus boy. The frontal cortex gets impacted. So that's the part of the brain that's around impulse control, language, like being able to articulate how you feel, executive function and big picture thinking and whole brain thinking is what we call it, not multitasking, whole brain thinking. So when a girl's brain, when she's thinking about something, many parts of her brain light up at the same time. When a boy is thinking about something, just kind of one part of his brain lights up at a time. It's just how that's just how our brains are working. The other thing that's impacted is the connective tissue between the two hemispheres of the brain. So if I, for example, when I'm working with clients, if I ask a woman, how do you feel about that? She can tell me. Whereas often if I ask a man, how do you feel about that? He'll have to stop. And he'll actually have to really, there's this long pause, right? So what I often will ask my male clients is, what do you think about that? He'll be able to give me an answer about that right away, because the thinking and the feeling are on different parts, and he's actually paying attention to those words. If I ask a woman, what do you think about that? What do you feel about that? She equates thinking and feeling as the same thing. She doesn't necessarily see those as two different things. Now again, generalization. Women use on average 12 words for every one word that a man uses. So we just use a lot more words. And here we can do like a little fun experiment. Pick up your phone. If you have it handy, pick up your phone. Okay. Check your last text exchange with the person of the other gender. So if you have a male brain, check the last text exchange with the person closest to you that has a female brain. So as Faizan, you would check ours, right? Oh no, I'm talking in your style. Okay, I'll just do a screenshot. Can you move that so I can see what it looks like?
Don't do a screenshot.
No, it's just here. It's just a quick one. You're not going to read it. Okay, the blue is me, and then the black is... oh no, look at you with your big long... This is not a good example, Faze.
Yeah.
Okay, here. Okay, here's a good example. Faizan's learning to be more expressive in his words, so I'm not finding a good example. But generally, the blue is Faizan and the black is me. Okay, so you can see
this.
The black there's more words, and the blue is shorter.
Don't use my phone
as examples.
As example, without telling me before.
Just so you can set it up.
So I can set it up for you.
Find the screenshot. So basically, when I do this with clients, I'll say like, let's look at your phone, and then they'll show me, and it'll be like, her is like, 2 or 3 sentences, and then he'll be like, yep, or nope, or an emoji. And again, this is not with every heterosexual couple, but many, or even like parent-child relationships, many. Simply because we have more language, because our brain just processes words and verbal language more quickly and more easily than a male brain. It's just the way we're designed. So now you can imagine the impact that has on communication, right? When we've worked with couples, we'll often watch as she's telling the story and he's just like he's like drifting away because she's just using so many words. And he's like, I don't know what's the important thing.
Sometimes it's the words, but it's also the point of communication is different, right?
The purpose.
The purpose of communication is to solve problems, not to,
to bond. Yeah. And that when I work with same-sex couples, especially women, I love doing that work because we get to like really unpack. Like, when you said that thing and you made that gesture, you didn't actually make eye contact at that part where you said that thing. How did that feel to you? And then the other woman will say, oh, and because they're speaking the same language, they can understand each other in a way, or if I'm working with mothers and daughters, right, we're understanding each other in a certain way. Male brains work differently with communication. So if he asks me what's wrong and I say nothing, he's just going to accept that. And in his mind, it's like, well, she'll tell me if she wants me to help her. Otherwise, I don't want to intrude. I don't want to impose. I don't want to push. Because that's how you would interact with your guy friends, generally.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And I think, again, like the idea being that we talked about it, right? Like, the reason we're sharing this tool, again, it's not to diagnose your partner. Don't go diagnosing your partner with, oh, yeah. Don't start creating charts tomorrow of how many words you're using versus that the other person's using. The point of the tool is just like, okay, what is, and sometimes like for Sarah and me, we have to literally clarify what is the purpose of that communication that's happening?
Yeah.
Right? So
just this afternoon.
Yeah,
He's
I'll
like,
ask.
I don't want to get into an argument about this, but we need to talk about it. Because he knew it was an emotionally charged topic that he wanted to talk to me about. And he knows that when we start talking and there's feelings involved, my feelings are going to take priority over the facts.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's a Syra thing. Maybe it is. But he had to say that, like, I'm not trying to fight you. And so then I could, like, let my defenses down a little bit. And then kind of stay in my... When I felt the feelings come up, it's like, no, this is not the time for that. That's not going to get us to our goal, which is our goal is to solve this problem. Right? But we had to set that up right at the beginning of the conversation.
Right.
As you saw my heat rising.
And, yeah, it's just sometimes, like, you have a... You'll come to me and like, okay, I need to talk. I'm like, do I need to listen? Like, I literally ask, do I actually need to be listening? Like, no, I just need a dummy sitting there that I can just throw things at. Okay.
I just need a sounding board is what I'll say.
Yeah.
Can you just hear me out on something? Which means, like, don't give me your advice. Don't solve the problem. Just make the right sounds like, really? And then what happened?
Yeah. But it and it feels awkward as hell. I know some of our couples that we've coached, I'm sure, right? Like,
they say, like, this is so weird. Nobody talks like this.
Yeah. And the point is, we know nobody talks like this. And and the way we've been talking, there are problems with it. So either we make a choice of trying something different, and when we try something different,
it's going to feel awkward.
It's going to be awkward. For Syra and me now, it's not awkward. Hey, it's not a fight. I'm just bringing it up so we can figure out a path forward for this problem that we're having. Right? And being able to kind of get to that point, for us is now, it's a normal conversation, I would think. Yeah?
So I want to talk to you about aging and communication. So specifically in this book, in the female brain, they talk about oxytocin levels in the female brain as we age. So oxytocin is the bonding hormone. So when you hold a baby, so for women, when you hold a baby that is not yours and is restful or sleeping, there's a surge of oxytocin that gets generated in your brain. It also happens if you like animals and you're cuddling up with your favorite animal. It also happens when you hug somebody and you're like in a good space with them. So we need oxytocin to make us feel close. It's like the social lubricant. It keeps us connected as social mammals in community. Okay? After orgasm, women get a surge of oxytocin, which makes them want to feel close to their partner. If it's a heterosexual relationship, males get a surge of testosterone, which makes them feel a sense of pride and accomplishment. And if they get oxytocin in the male brain makes them sleepy. So here I am wanting to cuddle, and he's falling asleep. It's not personal. It's just the way that our brains are designed, right? So imagine how many conversations, if we didn't know that, once I read that, I was like, oh, okay, now I get it. He's not trying to be close. It's just that his brain's just responding differently to that hormone. Now, as women age, so every time you do something caring or nurturing as a female brain, when you do things that are caring or nurturing or loving or kind, you get a surge of oxytocin. So it makes you feel good to be helpful. It makes you feel good to be nurturing. As women age, especially as they go into perimenopause and menopause, they stop getting that oxytocin hit when they're doing this bonding thing. So many women in their 50s and later will say, I've spent my whole life doing all these things it's my turn now. I am sick and tired of doing things for the whole world and nobody ever does anything for me, and now it's going to be about me now. And they think that that's their idea. But part of it is that you're actually not getting the reinforcement of the oxytocin. You're not getting the feel-good feeling from helping that you used to get. It's like biological. And so...
Is there a way to change that so far? Like, have they talked about...
I don't know. There might be. Get a pet.
But
you'll want to help the pet, not a human.
And what about males? when testosterone.
So
goes down.
testosterone. So what'll happen for a lot of men as they age is that, so now men and women both have estrogen and testosterone. Okay, in the female brain, estrogen is higher, testosterone is lower for most of their lives, and then as they age, estrogen goes down, and so now there's like, relatively speaking, more testosterone. It's not that testosterone's changed, it's just that it's not mitigated by estrogen. Same thing happens for men, right? So for men, they have high levels of, and again, put all that gender stuff, a disclaimer and all that, right? So male brain, testosterone is high, estrogen is lower, and then as the male brain ages, the testosterone comes down. So it's not that estrogen goes up, it's just relatively speaking, it's more apparent. So often we'll find that as the male brain ages, the males seem to become more expressive and more in touch with their emotions. So that's like the sweet old grandpa, right? That kind old. Yeah? That's part of what happens, is that your estrogen is more accessible to your brain. And so tend to be more nurturing. Right? And for the female brain, estrogen goes down, so that impulse to nurture goes down, and then the reinforcement of the oxytocin isn't happening anymore. So it could seem like that as women age, they become more like rigid and structured and about themselves, more self-absorbed rather than other-absorbed. Generalize. Someone saying, now it makes sense, or rather, I understand better now. Yeah. Someone saying, so true, got it. So silence is golden, as the saying goes, for the male.
Keep the mouth shut. Keep it shut. But I wonder, right, like as we've seen couples who are older, and the men in the relationship, again, heterosexual relationship, the men are trying to rekindle their relationship with the kids as they're
because they're feeling that nurturing, that warmth, that closeness,
or they're just wanting a sense of relationship kind of after the accomplishment phases have kind of
the testosterone. Yeah.
So I wonder if some of that is tied, and obviously there's a lack of it, because if we didn't invest time early on, later on it gets difficult to kind of connect,
to generate that,
right?
Yeah.
So how do we like what's a way through now, right? Okay, there are differences, yet we need to live together. No, because again, like, you know, if we go back again in time, even like this is a new phenomena where we spend so much time together with our significant other. Right? Usually it used to be, even right later on, like you'd be at work, right? Like the women would spend a lot of time with women, men would spend time with men. Again, generalization. So this new phenomenon is like, okay, we have to live together, we have to do things together.
Well, it's funny, so during the lockdown, we got like, I think 4 different requests to speak to couples online about, like, specifically heterosexual couples, about being around each other all day, right? And these different communication styles that you might not notice if you're only interacting for a couple of hours a couple hour in the morning, a few hours in the evening, and then you're off both doing your own thing during the day. That's a different kind of dynamic than day in, day out sitting beside. But not just that, but also with retirement, right? So I have people who come to me who are now entering retirement, and for the first time have to spend an entire day, week, month in the company of this person, and they haven't maybe had to do that before.
Right.
And people don't know what to do.
Even with technology, there is this expectation that we would stay in touch. Right? Like there's this expectation, like, are you thinking of me? Like, the hell?
Before just this picture.
Can I say no?
You see this picture here of his family? That was enough back in the olden days. Just a picture in his office, that would have been enough. Now he actually has to like send me emojis and things during. Poor guy.
It's too much work, man.
Okay, so someone's asking a question. Bro, is he reading our minds? You have to live together with this nurturing part or the brain ain't working. Right. So what do we do when we have to live together? What are people here doing? How are you managing? Because you might not know some of these facts, but as we're talking about them, you're like, oh, now I understand. So how do you navigate the differences between yourself and the different brains in the household? Like we've got 2 estrogen, 1.5 estrogen brains, her estrogen starting to kick in, and now 2 testosterone brains, and it's very different. Like it's just different. And then add on top of that love languages that we talked about last week, even more complicated, right? So how do we live together? Well, first, I think knowledge is power. So even knowing these things, I might stop and ask myself, like, is this a brain thing? Is this a testosterone thing? Right? Or is this a me thing?
Sure.
Read the books.
And it could
so
be.
Good.
It could be.
So
but
so good.
it seems like an excuse, doesn't it? To because there are ways. Yeah, like, okay, I do need to connect with Sarah. Sometimes I need to write out a sentence in a text message.
Well, yeah,
right?
okay. So
part of those
understanding
skills,
doesn't make it. It's just like knowing about your childhood trauma. Okay, you can know about your childhood trauma, but then if you just use it as an excuse to never grow, then that's not really helpful. So you can know about your estrogen or your testosterone, your oxytocin or your adrenaline or your cortisol. Great, but knowing doesn't make it a get out of jail free card. You still want to do something, right? So someone's saying it's so weird not having those activities. It's like, where did the other part of my body go? And can I actually see the future?
Mm-hmm. So I think they're talking about the nurturing part. I'm
yeah.
assuming, like when it goes, right? Like it's you feel like it. I mean, I'm not going to experience this. When you go through menopause, I've heard, right? Like people, like, I just feel like
I don't feel like myself.
Yeah, like I feel like a different person, right?
Mm-hmm.
And or the partner's like, this is not the person.
So the person's referring to retirement and old age.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So even not having like to go to work and like some of those routines change. Yeah.
Right. And even our bodies, right? Like our bodies don't move in the way that they used to, or they're not doing the things that we used to be able to expect them to easily do. All of those things.
Yeah.
Somebody's saying, I have males in my life who are chatty. Why is that? Personality. So then there's also things like extroversion and introversion, right? So for example, our business partners, Monique in Texas. Texas is very much an extrovert. Yeah? And Monique's very much an introvert. So though has estrogen in her brain, she's not as chatty of a person as her spouse. And he's chatty because he likes to socialize and interact with people. So get Texas and me in a room together, we just don't shut up. And Faizan and Monique are just watching us, like maybe throwing in a word here and there, right? And so it's not necessarily about genders or hormones, it's about personalities too. So yeah, it's not just this one thing. So that's what thanks for bringing that up, because I think that's important to note, is it's not just this. There's a combination of factors that are happening. Right. You could be having just a really bad day and so not being less verbal or less physical than you usually are. And
the males could be chatty, but the point of the conversation could still be about problem solving. Or really, you're not getting there was
here's a good one. Someone saying, I thought I was growing as I'm taking care of myself, putting myself first, but now it sounds like it's just hormonal. Please comment on this. Yes, so it's probably a combination, right? So you say okay, this change is happening. Now, what are you going to do about that? So let's take it back. Let's take it to teenage years. Okay, so a child is going from childhood and now they're getting this flood of estrogen or this flood of testosterone. They're moving into adolescence. This change is happening. Whether we like it or not, the changes will happen. How are we going to ride that wave of change? That's going to determine what kind of success or failure, if you will, or what kind of challenge or enjoyment you're going to have on the other side of that change. Okay, so the teenager that's feeling these changes and sees the excitement in it and sees the opportunity in it and tries to kind of get to know themselves again and is able to say goodbye to their childhood and move into this new phase of life, they're going to have a much easier time than the teenager who's holding on for dear life saying, I don't want to grow up, I don't want to grow up, I don't want to grow up, I want to be a kid forever, right? And somehow at that age and stage, most of us naturally move to that next thing. I wonder, I have some theories. I think part of it is our obsession with youth culture, like our obsession with youngness. But it seems like as we move to this next phase of life where we're going through this other hormonal change again, there's a bit of a kind of wanting to hold on to the last phase and not wanting to let it go, rather than kind of seeing what's it going to be, what's this next phase going to be. And one of my teachers, Kate Wolfpizer, talks about these 3 phases for a woman's life, maiden, mother, and crone. Maiden, mother, and crone. And so this comes from the Celtic philosophy worldview, where maiden is the young woman who's like exploring and interested in the world and kind of a student and learning and kind of like the whole world is ahead of you and you have this beautiful body, and that's the maiden. And then we move into the mother stage. Whether you actually have children or not, it's that nurturing, the giving, the caring, the collecting, the family, the home, the looking after phase. And then there's the 3rd phase, which is the crone or the grandmother stage, where now it's about looking back and serving everything that you've built and offering wisdom and having that kind of like wise, quiet smile in the corner and thinking about like philosophical ideas and, you know, what's after life and these kinds of, so not as much action oriented as the mother stages, but more being oriented in the crone or the grandmother stage. So there are changes that are going to happen, right? And how are you going to, so as the changes happen and you don't feel the same satisfaction in looking after others, okay, so maybe it's now about looking after myself. Maybe I want to turn that around and look back at myself and say, what's my life about? My life has been about all these people for so long. Now what about me? So I think that's a really healthy way of managing the shift, rather than saying like, I have to be in that mother stage forever. But then we're going to really, life is going to take us to the next phase, whether we are going willingly or not. So it may be, I wouldn't say it's just hormonal, but hormones do make an impact. Yeah. What about men and their stages?
Boys.
And that's it?
That's it. No. According to the King Warrior Magician Warrior book, King Warrior Magician Lover, that book, the stages are actually
they're more like identities, right?
They're more like identities,
like elements,
and incorporating all those identities,
right?
So I think the part of it is about boyhood, and then getting into the mature level of that, and then into manhood, and then being a mature man, right? So and a lot of us get stuck sometimes in that boy stage, whether it's immature, same thing with men, and then like for a mature man, it's to be able to get to the level of, do I show up as a king, which means from a sovereign perspective, it's I'm gonna look after this kingdom, make sure. That doesn't mean I have to be the one speaking, doesn't mean I have to be the one making the decisions, but the right people are in the place, right, to be able to do that. Sometimes as a warrior, to be able to, right? Like sometimes a stance is required. Sometimes a sword, it needs to be used, right? It needs to be sharp, it needs to be edgy to be able to get some things done. Then there's a lover, right? And then there's magician, so those are connecting. A mature man is able to connect with other men and women, and the magician is kind of that philosopher, being able to say, okay, how are we going to transform this situation? So I think this there's a whole graph in there and whatnot. So I'm not sure, just like you had a Celtic reference, I don't know if the Celtic reference, there's one that exists for men, and that, but I don't know if there's one, just like a ladder type type stage.
Well, with the female one, it's a triangle.
Yeah.
So it's very deliberately not a ladder, right? It's because the idea is that for each one of us, we can have all three of those elements within us. So I have my inner child, right, the maiden. I have my mother self and my wise woman, all inside of me at any given moment. And then my biology will line up to one of those at any given stage in my life. So the idea is that we have access to all three all the time. And so Faizan's template's a little bit different. So it's not as far as like age stage. It's more like these elements and these different like different elements that come in. The name of the book is King, Warrior, Magician.
It might be a different order.
King, Warrior. Isn't it here somewhere?
Yeah, anyways.
Somewhere.
We'll look for it later. But I think somebody was saying it got blurry.
So someone's saying the communication was blurry and then the screen blanked out. Oh, I'm sorry. You might have to watch the replay again if you missed a portion.
Yeah, I'm not sure which part Sarah was speaking at. But I think for men, right, like where the struggle happens is being able to, right, like if at work I'm expected to be one of these different roles, right? And at home there's something else expected. That transition sometimes doesn't happen.
Can you talk about communicating from like an example of what communication?
Yeah, so like communication as a warrior would be very, right?
Like direct?
Direct, and this is what we're doing. Like imagine in a war, right?
Authoritative.
Like authoritative, but like this is what needs to happen. And
decisive,
and I'm gonna execute on it, right? And part of it is I'm here to protect that. The kingdom, the family, the situation, the company, whatever it might be, wherever we might be putting this particular philosophy towards. Now at home, the same communication schedule, same communication style might not be required. Certain times the warrior needs to step up, but most of the times it might just be the lover that needs to show up. But if we're not in touch with that, if we're not in touch with our emotions,
so what would the lover communication style sound like?
It's really focused on connections, right? So this thing about like men not being able to feel, it's a big thing. But it's like, okay, how do we tap into those feelings? How do we go beyond the thinking mind? Because the thinking mind, the problem with the thinking mind, at least for some, is that we get anxious because the thoughts just keep running. It's like, okay, wait, what's the feeling? Like what are we actually, or what's the anger about? What's the sadness about? What is the grief? Going deeper and deeper than the thought. Just to be able to say, okay, I can now connect. I can be more vulnerable, so I can show up vulnerably. And part of what I was asking about earlier is like, okay, how do we live together? and a lot of us are being asked. Now the thing is, we can't just get stuck in the lover mode, because then nothing gets done.
Right.
And for men to actually feel, at least in my opinion, men to feel good about themselves, they're also doing things. Doesn't mean that doesn't mean the amount of money. But
that's the divine masculine, right?
Yeah. So that there's a purpose being lived, right? Like, so I am living a purpose here.
Yeah.
Right. So when I show up here, there's a purpose behind, right? Like this piece about impacting 1 million families. Right, it's really tied to that, and it's like, okay, how do I continue showing up? As a warrior, okay, how do I execute? Right, today the conversation about it was, okay, we got to make certain decisions, right? But it's always around that purpose. But without a purpose, it feels very off. And I think, again,
what about the
I haven't been through it. I saw my dad go through it. I saw your dad go through it. When they had their retirement, it felt like they lost their purpose. Because it's like, oh, I can't provide for the family anymore. So what good am I? Like these were the thoughts that were going on in their heads.
That was before retirement, when they got sick.
Yeah, but right? Exactly.
They were no longer able to work, and then losing that sense of
So I wonder how much of that plays into it, right? Like, so it's not about am I retired from work, but like when I wake up, what purpose am I waking up with?
Right.
Whether it could be the divine purpose.
What impact am I making?
Yeah, I'm getting connected to the divine source.
If we think about the divine feminine and the divine masculine principle, right? The divine feminine principle is about being, and the divine masculine principle is about doing, right? So being and doing. And each one of us needs to be balanced in both within ourselves. So there needs to be a balance of doing and being within each one of us. And we live in a culture where doing is much more highly prioritized than being. Mm-hmm. And so many of us have gone kind of into that untrue masculine of just do with no sense of fulfillment or ease or connection in the midst of that.
Right. And that's why for a mature man, it just can't be the king and the warrior. You got to have the magician and the lover.
What's the magician? So curious.
So the magician is the...
like the alchemist?
Yeah.
Like the one who transforms?
Yeah. So you take a situation and you're like, okay, right, like we're going to apply a process to it or whatever. Like we're going to actually move past it by connecting to the source, right? To say, okay, we're gonna tap into something that's going to actually transform the situation for us. And so, but to be able to do that, that means I gotta foster those connections. I gotta foster that connection with the source and the divine to be able to get to that point where it's like, okay, what does this situation actually require, right? And that, right, understanding that and tapping into that, and then going to the king mode, letting that be the source of the decisions that we're going to make and how we're going to move forward. And yes, somebody's got to make a decision. It's going to be like, so can you make the decision? No, you got to make the decision. So it's like step into that, own it, own this life of yours, right? So anyways, I mean, it goes deeper than that. Every time I read that book, I think I've read it like 4 times now. That book, I feel like I've gotten maybe 10% of the content. It's dense. It's not just dense in the sense that it's not easy to read. It's dense. Like, okay, how do I apply this? Mm-hmm. Right, and so I'm in the process of still applying it. So it's an interesting way of going about, but I wonder, right, like how that actually impacts the communications. And,
like I'm just thinking, right, if I was in a situation with somebody like a Faizan who is unaware that there's different ways to communicate and they're always stuck in the warrior mode, for example, that'd be really tiring. Yeah. For me.
And it's good, and like that attracted you, right? At the beginning, I was like, okay, this guy gets shit's done. But like, you know, because some people,
that's what attracted me.
Maybe not you, but like,
nope, not that one.
Not you, but like it's like, oh, okay, like this person gets things done, and like it's direct, but then that directness when the sword starts, you know, cutting me, like, whoa, like what? Like, wait, why am I bleeding? Right? Because part of it is like well, this is their style. So again, the work is to be able to get in touch with all of these parts. Is not to let one rule over the other.
Right.
Sure.
So how do we live together? I think end of the
by
day...
keeping my mouth shut.
I think end of the day, it's getting more curious about the other person. That's, I think, right? Because understanding myself and then getting curious about the other person and what is their communication style.
Like, you remember we were going to New York right before COVID?
Yeah.
We had that fight. Every time you get on a plane, there's a fight.
Not every time.
Almost every time. Almost every
time. Like, when other time? Just that one time?
Well, I don't know.
Cuba.
The honeymoon.
Okay, so 2 times. In all of the plane... Every time we get on a plane. 2 times!
Honeymoon. Going to London.
Did we get on a plane on London?
Yes. It's okay. Don't worry about it.
I think if you're locked into a seat beside me for hours, there's going to be some disagreement at some point.
Yes.
Don't blame the plane.
I'm not blaming the plane. I'm blaming the passenger next to me. Don't worry. Plane has nothing to do with this. I'm just saying, right? Like, remember that conversation, right? It was like, oh, I had to actually step in and ask for what I needed. I needed to be the warrior and say, okay, I demand that sometimes let's make it about me. Like, even that conversation, you had to have the wherewithal to say, okay, right? How do I not take this personally? How do I, right?
It was hard, man.
Yeah. And you did take it personally. It took a while until we got to the hotel room to kind of get past it. But to be able to kind of okay, I had to step up. It was awkward. Probably could have said it better, used different words or whatever. You could have handled it better. But it's like, it's part of it is allowing for that conflict, right? I think a lot of us, especially when we're living together, we're like, oh, if there's conflict, this needs to end. Right? The relationship needs to end. The relationship is in trouble. And that's part of our brain where it's like it's looking for danger. And so if we're having a conflict, if we're having a fight, it feels like danger.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, oh, this must end. No, it's conflict. It's okay. Let's work through it.
Right. It's incredible how many times I've worked with clients to actually speak what they need to their partner. And when they do, of all genders, and when they do, it's like, oh, they didn't even know I needed that. But the fear was so strong that two things. One, if I say anything, something's gonna happen to the relationship. Or two, what if I say something and nothing changes? Then I've gone through all this discomfort and I've put myself on the line and been vulnerable, and nothing changes anyway. So people sometimes don't even say anything.
Maybe not, but something changes in you, right? Because this was probably the first time you said something. You stated a need, and so
first time you like in our conversation. The first time you
but it's like okay, I said something. I stated a need. Even if nothing changed from your end,
at least you spoke up.
And it's like, and so I change in the relationship, and if I'm changing, that means the relationship is changing, right? But it's a weird one to get through because I want the other person to acknowledge it. I want the other person to be the to reflect the change. It's like it doesn't work, right? You know, like we do this work. We go through workshops and we study and we still falter and fail
all the time.
Right? So allowing for that
the
clumsiness, I guess, right, to show up.
Like yesterday, can I tell you what happened?
Oh, God.
So remember, I spent the whole day rearranging the living room and the kitchen, and I'm like waiting for him to come see. He's just sitting downstairs reading his book. Finally comes upstairs and he's like, oh, guess I'll have to get used to it. It's like, dude, man. But I just had to say, yes, Faizan does not like change. That was a pretty good response for somebody who does not like change.
I like change. I'm okay with change.
Not of furniture.
No, don't.
Yes.
Yeah.
At all.
No.
So in my mind, I'm expecting him to give me something that I know he's not capable of. I mean, not that you're not capable of, but it's not your natural response to say, wow, what a great idea. We should have done this 6 months ago.
Yeah,
that's what my daughter said.
I know.
She knows what to say.
Right. And I'm glad you have a daughter that can say that. I don't have to now pretend and use up my energy faking it for a couple of hours and then be like, but you know, it's going to be a little different like I used to.
Someone's saying, what about a long car ride? Same thing, locked in.
We don't.
But I would say long car rides before 8 p.m. Remember, after 8 p.m., the captain is not on board and we don't use the best words and we take things personally. So early day car rides are great. And also giving space that they might not want to talk, that they might want a break from the talking, which is okay too. Listen to some music or be in silence. Someone saying, yes, how do you live together? Oh my God, I have to get on a plane this weekend. Wow, is he reading our minds? Very interesting. Thanks for clarifying about arguing and expression.
Yeah.
Sometimes to avoid an argument, we won't say anything at all. And then the resentment builds, right? Because we think that they should know by now. If you don't know me by now, after all these years, then, right? But it's like, but I've never said it all these years. So they're not a mind reader, as much as we wish our loved ones could read our minds.
Right. Yeah. So last 5 minutes here. If there are any other questions,
already.
Yeah. If there are any other questions, please add and share.
One other thing I wanted to mention about this one is there's a whole section on falling in love and how falling in love for the female brain is like getting hooked on a drug. So breaking up is like withdrawal from a drug for the female brain. And it's the same kind of like excruciating pain as getting off like a serious, like a cocaine or heroin or like a serious drug addiction. So if you're going through a breakup or the end of a relationship, your communication will be impacted because of the hormones that are flooding all through your brain during that breakup. That's another thing to think about.
Now, how do you work through that? Like, other than
abstinence, stay away from the thing. That's actually what they talk about, is that the they say like there should be a no contact period, or those kind of things we talk about. There should be a period of like a cutoff period or whatever. That's true.
Can I use that with you? It's no contact period.
No, we're not broken up.
Oh, you have to be broken up.
Yes.
All right.
You have to be addicted to me. And then you have to detox from the addiction.
Ooh, no contact period.
But especially, those... Oh, man. There will be a follow-up conversation off camera. So for female relationships, if they're at different hormone stages in life, the relationship will change in time. So you mean like two women? Yeah, so I think your question's about so for a same-sex relationship with two women, if they're at different, probably, yeah. So if there's, say, for example, if one woman is going through her change, like menopause, and the other one isn't there yet, you might see a difference in the way that you're tending to relate to each other. There might be changes. Even in a sister relationship, like, it doesn't have to be a romantic relationship, any relationship. So the older sister might be kind of going through a new... I've seen this a lot when... Okay, matrescence. I want to throw that word out there. I've talked about it in Chai and Chat as well. It hasn't got picked up yet in the literature, but I think it should. So, you know how we have adolescence when a young person goes through all these hormonal changes? There was a paper in the 70s that somebody wrote around a concept called matrescence, because when a woman gets pregnant, delivers a baby, and is nursing, there's a specific thing that happens hormonally, and there's a huge identity change and a life change. And the idea is, like, what if we actually taught women and men and people that stage of life, if you choose to go through that stage of life, there's actually a profound shift in identity that happens. So if I have, with two sisters, for example, and one of them is going through becoming a mother and the other one isn't, there's going to be different identities, there's going to be different priorities, there's going to be a change in the relationship, for sure. Matrescence.
Good luck spelling
I'll
that.
try to spell that.
Yeah.
Yes, so there will be... even like cousins, sisters, friends, if you're at different hormonal stages, there could be some differences, and it might be worth, I think, for any female estrogen brain people on this call, read this book. It's so eye-opening around why certain things feel a certain way at different stages and phases of life. They talk about how at the age of 2, there's a huge rush of estrogen that little girls get at the age of 2. And so little girls will focus on relationship building at 2 in a way that little boys just don't. They just don't. Their focus is more on physical agility and spatial awareness at 2. Whereas little girls start getting really curious about other humans, right? Now imagine if you had an older sister that was 2 when you were born, or that was 1 when you were born, and then she became 2 when you were 1. Like, there's all of that interesting things, right, that can happen because of hormones.
And hopefully, again, the hormone isn't to explain away all the issues.
The author is Luann Brizendine, same for both books. Luann Brizendine, MD. And it's not to give anybody a get out of jail free pass. It's for more understanding, right? And then you can actually ask yourself, what is this about? Is this a physiological thing that's happening right now? And then you have some choice over it. And just like you've learned about, when you get really angry, that's a physiological thing. Once you know that this isn't me, then you have some choice over it. Okay. So I think we'll probably end there today.
Yeah, just want to make sure. All right. To the streamers or
streamers.
I guess where we're streaming, I don't know.
The viewers.
It's really the long weekend for me. I'm like, I'm not in this. We'll say bye to our YouTube, Facebook participants if you're watching.
See you next time.
See you next time.